Welcome all to our monthly lecture series. Tonight, John McNiff from the Roger Williams National Memorial in Providence is speaking to us. For 26 years, he's been an enthusiastic guide and park ranger of the park, which is the smallest one in the United States.
No, it's not.
All right, good.
Oh, really?
And I have worked downtown for 45 years, so I've gone by that park many, many times. I've always enjoyed. I've driven by and walked through it. A beautiful spot.
I couldn't make it.
John studied archaeology at Cambridge University, and he earned an MA in anthropology at Binghamton University in New York. He is an historical reactor, a consultant for history films, and over the years, he's given countless in-person talks to local groups and visitors from all over the world. Most of you have probably visited Roger Williams Park, where John's going to tell the story about how this unique tribute to our state's founding father came about. When we invited him to tell this origin story, he promised to make this program the best of all the virtual programs we've hosted since the pandemic. So the pressure is on, John.
That's it. I got it. I got this.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. Hi, everybody. Hope everybody's having a good night. And we're expecting a wonderful weekend. It's going to be up near 60.
Oh.
This is Rhode Island. Come on.
Yeah.
Today and 60 tomorrow. The Roger Williams National Memorial is not the smallest national park in the country. There are about 27 smaller ones,
Really?
including the smallest is in Philadelphia. It's Thaddeus Kosciuszko. It's a single part of a building.
Huh.
There's a Civil War battlefield in Mississippi that's only a half an acre. We have 4.5 acres there in along North Main Street. So we've got a nice little parcel of land. I always thought it was the smallest one for a long time too, so it's no fault on anybody. It's a small park. Before I was a ranger there, I made fun of the rangers being squirrel rangers or something like that. But we have a different purpose. It's a national memorial. It's not so much a national park. The national parks like Yellowstone, Yosemite, they're beautiful natural features that our country has. But a national memorial is something different. You've got the Lincoln Memorial in Washington. It's a place to go to remember what Abraham Lincoln did for this country. The Roger Williams National Memorial is a place to go to remember what Roger Williams did for this country and for the world, not just for Rhode Island. So that's why it has a national significance. And it was a long fight to get to this place. I'm going to go way back though, because I like to set the stage before I give any sort of a talk, to set the stage for what is this place that we're talking about, okay? And when you go really, really way far back, long before the English were here, Native Americans have been here on this continent. They used to think just a few years ago that it was only 12 or 15,000 years. Just this year, out west, they have found footprints at a national park in the stone that go back 22,000 years, human footprints. So Native Americans, human beings, have been on this continent for at least that long. And if you talk to the people of the Native American organizations around us, the Narragansett, the Pokanoket, any of the Native Americans, they will tell you they've been here since time immemorial. Well, we don't have a date when they came to this area. But for a long, long time, this area where we are right now was underneath a mile of ice. So looking straight up from the ground that we have, goes straight up, it's all ice for 1 mile, 5,280 feet straight up. And that's acting like a big bulldozer coming down from the north, pushing rocks and dirt, grinding down hills. And it's pushing things in front of it. And this is the perfect time of year to think about this. When you see a snowplow going through a parking lot or going along the edge of your lawn, and it digs up dirt along with the ice and snow. It tumbles it all along. That's why we have these weird rocks sitting on top of other rocks in some places. And then you have things like Cape Cod and Long Island. It's what they call the terminal moraine. It's where the glacier stopped and then started to retreat. Basically, that's that pile of snow at the edge of the parking lot. When you go there in the spring, there's a big mound of dirt. That's what Long Island and Cape Cod are. They're the places where the glaciers stopped. And as the glaciers started to retreat, people started coming in here and plants started to grow. It wasn't forested or anything like that. It was pretty much of a tundra. And I've got some pictures. I'm going to try and see if we can do this screen share thing. Hold on. Here we go. And I'm over here. My mouse is acting up there. Can everybody see this?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. This is what our area would like as the glaciers in the background there are retreating. It's much more, it's an open area. You've got muskox, you've got mastodon, you've got these wide, broad rivers, and all of Narragansett Bay is a valley with rivers running down the bottom of it. Block Island is attached to the mainland. That's a hilltop. The islands in the bay are hilltops. And as the glaciers retreat, the water melts, it increases the sea level.
You want
and
to watch this?
I'm sorry?
You want to watch this?
As the glaciers retreat, the water's melting, it raises the sea levels, and that river and that valley, those river valleys, that is Narragansett Bay, starts to flood and it fills up to the way that we know it now. To give you an idea, there are people here along with these animals, and this is a mastodon. And I'm going to go to here, I think, and here, hold on, moving things out of the way. Go to the next picture to give you an idea about the size of a mastodon. There's a normal sized person, and there's a mastodon.
Oh, yeah.
And I think it was in the early 1970s. There was a quahogger off of Wickford, and he's working the bull rake, trying to earn his living for the day, and he gets stuck on something. He finally tugs and pulls it up, and it's a large bone. And he's never seen anything like it. He takes it down to URI. They examine it, and they realize it's a bone from a mastodon.
Wow.
How do you like that right
Yeah,
off the
Rhode
Wickford?
Island?
Yeah.
And in it is the broken off tip of a spearhead. So we know people were hunting these animals right here in Rhode Island, going back 10, 12,000 years ago. The land didn't look like anything that we have now. It was a very different kind of environment. As things settled down, more and more people came here. The people that were here, their numbers grew. And this is what Providence would have looked like about 1,000 years ago. Now, let me orient you. Let's see. Can you see where my mouse is?
Yeah.
Mhm.
This is downtown Providence,
Wow.
okay? This over here is about where the State House is.
Hmm. Hmm.
This is Charles Street. This is
Yeah.
North Main Street. And the Roger Williams National Memorial is right down here about where that red bush is. People came from all over to come here because of the resources. The Mashassack River here and the Woonasquatucket going out this way towards Oneyville fed into this great salt cove. And then right at the Weybosset Crossing, the Turk's Head building will be right about here, Weybosset Crossing, and then the Providence River, and it goes down to the Narragansett Bay. What you've got here are two freshwater rivers emptying into a saltwater cove. Now, you've all seen the grizzly bears going after the salmon out west, right? Great big grizzly bears diving into river and coming up with a nice 25-pound salmon. Well, salmon used to run up the Mashassack and the Woonasquatucket rivers as well. Only these guys were North Atlantic salmon. They were much bigger. We're talking 50, 60, 70 pounds a piece. And right at that Weybosset crossing, it was a ford. At low tide, you could walk across. So when 2 rivers worth of salmon are running up the bay to go up those rivers, they got stuck there. And the people would go there and harvest the salmon and smoke them. They'd go after quahogs, oysters. Where the mall is right now is a huge oyster bed with oysters up to a foot across. Lobsters, crabs, eels, all kinds of resources. And we're on the Northeast Flyway.
What is that?
So ducks and geese would all fly over and stop here, and they would be able to hunt them as well. They'd go out into the countryside and hunt deer and bear, all of these things. But this was a tremendous resource. So if you look at a modern map, you see Route 1 goes from Boston, comes right through here, crossed over here, and went on all the way to New York. Route 6 goes from the tip of the Cape all the way across to right here, and actually went across right around in here and goes out west. Route 44 comes from the tip of the Cape, comes right into here, and then goes out a little bit lower to the west. All of these were Native American highways long before they became English roads. And by highways, I mean, look at them. They're not footpaths. They're worn down for years and years and years at a time.
Very interesting.
People traveling to this place to gather the resources and then harvest them. And now, when you have that many people in one place, you have to have something to make sure that they don't get into fights. Some people are going to fall in love. Some people are going to get angry. They're going to be settling disputes. But also, they used to have huge games up here where the State House is. It was called the Plain, a big open area. And they would have 100 people on a side playing a game that's very similar to football. You'd have a ball. It's a little bit bigger it's smaller than a volleyball, but bigger than a softball. And they'd play that game there. This was a tremendous resource spot. And with all the salt water, there's a freshwater spring right over in here. This is about 1,000 years ago. But people had been using this place for thousands of years by that time. The English came here to Providence in 1636. This is another view of the same spot about the year 1650. The State House would be right up here. The mall sits right here. This is Federal Hill, and the 610 connector goes right around the bottom of Federal Hill. This is North Main Street. This would be Roger Williams' house. Right across from his house, you see this big tree. There was a freshwater spring. All the people traveling on North Main Street, which is Route 1, get to stop there. This becomes the Starbucks of the day, where everybody stops and talks and shares gossips and tells stories. And Roger, the one advantage he gave to himself when he founded Rhode Island was he put himself right across from the spring. This is a picture of that spring. They said it was gushing forth out of the hillside. So the road is up here. There's a dune going down to the water level, and the water is gushing out of the hillside. Now, we had these pictures put together so that they're on waysides at the memorial today, so people could have an idea what the place would have looked like in the past. We had to try to attract people's attention to them because otherwise they're just signs out there in the park. And one of the things that I thought would be really interesting is even little kids walking by a sign, they'll see a dog. And they say, what's the dog about? And they go over there and the parents read them the sign and everybody gets to be educated whether they like it or not. Time goes on. I'm not going to go into details about the Roger Williams story. That's a different lecture altogether, but he came here in 1636, establishing the first place with complete religious freedom, where that chain in between government and religion was broken. And when you break that chain, the people become the foundation of civil power. The people in Rhode Island got to vote for their governor, for their General Assembly. This is the first place that was allowed. This is a map of Providence about 1650. Let me see if we can get in closer. To give you some orientation. Here's that Great Salt River, the Providence River. Here's the settlement. Here's that Great Salt Cove. The State House is going to be right here. The Mashassack River going up this way. The Winnosquatucket River going over towards Oneyville. This is the Seekonk River. There's a big salt marsh there. Weybosset Neck is right off there. South End Point, Miles End Cove, Fox's Hill. The Spring, still part of the map. Roger Williams' house right across the street from it. The first division of land, so if you look at this settlement, I'll give you a better picture of that right in the next one. I just wanted to show people where the cove was in relation to everything. Oh, go back a little bit. This is what the settlement looked like. The modern street pattern is laid over this. So you've got downtown Providence over here. Of course, this is a modern street pattern as of 1938 or so, before the Great Hurricane came through and got rid of these docks. But this is Weybosset Street. Here's North Main Street. And all of the house lots, the way this place is designed, if you think of a colonial town in New England, a lot of times you think of the town green with the houses all around it. It's not the way Providence was laid out. Everybody got the same thing, a little bit of the waterfront, some of the slope of the hill, and some of the flat land on top. Divided up among all the first comers, as they called them. Roger Williams came in 36. The Spring was right across the street from his house. John Smith, he became a miller. It says here that John Smith moved to the Mashassack Valley in 46. This is a map from the 1600s.
Wow.
If you're a native Rhode Islander, you'll understand the distances that we're talking about. Even back then, distances were strange. This is John Smith. He moved to the Mashassack Valley in 46. Here he is, right up here. That's about where the Marriott is, or the Girl Scout headquarters used to be. But he moved to the Mashassack Valley. He moved far away. This is what the original settlement would have looked like. This was a small town. Subsistence farming, fishing, boat building, but trade out of here and out of Newport and out of all the other little ports that we have in our 420 miles of coastline went all over the world. And this little colony started to grow. Now, that spring was important because that was the freshwater source for this town. And in 1721, we didn't have a town council yet. We didn't have a city council, but we had proprietors in Providence, and they sold the spring lot to the Huguenot Gabriel Burnin in 1721. That's the place where the spring was, but there was a stipulation on the deed that the spring at the bottom of the hill within said land, which liberty is reserved for the inhabitants to fetch water at said spring forever. This is the spring that fed the original settlement. And here it's still being preserved to take care of the people of Providence. And after a 1785 visit to Providence, Yale College president, Ezra Stiles, widely referred to the spring as Roger Williams Spring. This is the first attempt of any kind to give some sort of a place for Roger Williams. It's only 88 years after he died. So there are people that are still going to be around that he was part of their living memory. And then in 1771, this is big. 88 years after he died, the town meeting Providence residents voted to erect a stone to mark the purported site of Roger Williams' grave in an old apple orchard on the hill behind his house site. You got to remember, everything happens not just by itself, but in the context of things. 1771, why were they thinking about Roger Williams in 1771? Things that had been happening for the previous 10 years had gotten people thinking about what does it mean to be free? What does liberty mean? And Roger Williams, if you do a Google search on his books, in the late 1760s, early 1770s, people are starting to read Roger Williams' writings again, looking for his books, looking for what he wrote about freedom and liberty and personal freedom. So they got together and decided they wanted to mark where Roger Williams was buried, that this is an important thing for Providence. But they never got to put the monument there. The very next year, there was a little nasty incident down in Warwick at Nanquit Point, where a bunch of people from Providence went down there with those grand words of personal freedom and liberty and burned a British revenue schooner called the Gaspee. And shortly after that, there was a large war, and wars take people's attention away from things like monuments and things like that. In the late 18th and early 19th century, reports suggested the Roger Williams Spring remained exposed to the landscape, that it was open. It was a place you could still go and get water from that spring. In 1816, Nehemiah Dodge bought the land and built a very large brick residence over the spring. But to comply with that 1721 deed stipulation, Dodge provided a pump on Alamo Lane. It was a very narrow street running from North Main Street to Canal, right next to where the spring was. Dodge's estate gets sold in 1875. They widened North Main Street and they required the relocation of the Dodge house. And the spring was now being pumped out of the basement there and into a trough on Canal Street. Now, later part of the 19th century, well, the mid to the late part of the 19th century, people started to, again, look at what does it mean to be an American? What do all those ideals that were said by the founding fathers, what do they really mean? And in the spring of 1860, Stephen Randall and Zachariah Allen went to search for Roger Williams' remains on the hill, on Prospect Hill. Remember, in the late 1700s, they wanted to put a marker there. Here we are, 60, 70 years later. Now they're going to try and find the place where that grave was. They did find it. They excavated that. They found a few teeth, some bone fragments, some nails from the coffin. They collected that up and put it into the Randall Vault up at the North Burial Ground. Again, they were going to build some sort of a monument to Roger Williams, but they wanted to find his body. But if the date of 1860 means anything, there's going to be another interruption coming up called the Civil War. Before each of these dramatic events, these wars, these horrible things, there's the search for what does it mean to be free? And Roger Williams is part of that search all the way through this. Shortly after the American Civil War, a descendant of Roger Williams, his great-great-granddaughter, Betsy Williams, passed away. She had made her home on farmland that was originally owned by one of Roger Williams' sons, Joseph Williams. And she proposed to give that land to the city of Providence, that they can have an open park for people's recreation, as long as they built some sort of a monument to her ancestor. And that this park should be open to the people of Providence for free, or else it reverts back to the Williams family. Well, the city declined. That's too far away. Nobody's ever going to go there. It's 500 acres of land that the city just is not going to be able to use. So they said no. The Williams family offered it again to the city of Providence. And the city said, no, we're not going to do that. And then in 1775, streetcars came along. And there was a way for people that lived in the settled part of the city to be able to get out and enjoy this park. The city accepted it, and they unveiled that statue to Roger Williams at Roger Williams Park in October of 1877.
I don't think I've seen it, no.
That's it.
Hmm.
There we
Oh,
go.
yes.
Betsy Williams Cottage in
Yeah.
the
Oh, it's
background.
next to
Yeah,
theirs, but,
yeah,
oh, yeah.
yes, we've seen
Yeah,
that.
yeah, yeah, we've
Okay.
gone past that.
This is the very first memorial of any kind, substantial actual memorial to Roger Williams in the city. There's a lot of other things coming along, though. Shortly after this, about 1906, a monument was erected to commemorate the place where Roger Williams and others first set foot in Providence, in what is today, well, Slate Rock Park, Roger Williams Square. The monument was sponsored by the Providence Association of Mechanics and Manufacturers. Okay, now Slate Rock was supposedly where Roger Williams first came and set foot. It's on Gano Street. It was at the waterfront back then. There was this large piece of slate that jutted out into the water, and Roger Williams came across the Seekonk River, was greeted by some Narragansett with the three words that everybody, I'm sure, knows: "What cheer, knee top?" What cheer is a shortened version for what cheery news do you bring? It's today's equivalent of what's up. Knee top is the Narragansett word for friend. And in the later part of the 1800s, the silt was building up around the rock. The city of Providence decided they were going to clean this place out. And they had the civil engineers go down there, and they made some tests to see what the sand and dirt was like to move the dirt away from the rock. And a lot of them had been engineers for a while, and they figured, well, we'll just blow the sand away. We'll use some gunpowder and blow the sand away, which they had done countless times in other places. Gunpowder reacts differently than this new thing that they had. They had this brand new invention called dynamite. Gunpowder reacts very differently than dynamite does, particularly when compressed by wet soil. So they planted dynamite all around the rock to blow the sand away from it. Instead, they blew the rock to smithereens.
Genius.
But that place is where that monument was put up in 1906, and that's this one right here. That's Gano Street back there. The water is in the distance. At one point, the water came all the way up here. You would have the rock going out into the water.
Okay.
It's just about across the street from the Red Cross. There's Dunkin' Donuts over there too on Gano Street.
Oh, yeah.
I think the Red Cross is in this building.
Yeah, Local 57 used to be over there.
Yep, yep. But these are all different small monuments to Roger Williams. Now, let's see. Leading up to the Providence Tercentennial in 1936, a whole bunch of people wanted to get involved in this, in putting up monuments to our founding fathers. And in 1926, the U.S. War Department appropriated $1,500 toward a memorial of Roger Williams to be constructed at or near the spot in the present-day city of Providence where Roger Williams first landed in the state of Rhode Island. That's this monument right here. This is right on the sidewalk on North Main Street, right outside our National Memorial. They're getting close. They still haven't got to where we are yet. Shortly after the installation of that monument, Rhode Island Superior Court Judge Jerome Hahn purchased the commercial building that covered the spring that was there. And he wanted to restore it to a public access to the spring and memorialize his father, Isaac Hahn, who was the first person of the Jewish faith to be elected to a public office in Providence. The city of Providence ended up accepting Judge Hahn's terms, officially acquired the spring lot in 1931, along with the parcel immediate to the north. The city demolished the building over the spring, which had been the Rhode Island College of Pharmacy, and had historical architect Norm Isham design a public memorial, which was originally called the Roger Williams Spring Park. That's what you have here. That monument that's on the road is right up here. Here is the spring, this little wellhead down here. It's a nice little pocket. It's a little pocket park. It's the footprint of a single building.
You been there?
Hmm.
It's a lovely little spot. It's nice and quiet. Now, the Episcopal Church across the street wanted to have some sort of a monument for their founder, Gabriel Burnham, who originally acquired the spring lot and everything else. And so they got together with the city, and in 1954, just north of the spring, oh, that's not the one, there. Right in this area, the spring is right over there. This is called the Burnham Grove. They put in Norway maples, and there were about 16 of them originally. Already going ahead of myself. Then, the big one for us is the Prospect Monument. The original design for a monument up there going back to the 1800s was going to be a 200-foot tall monolith, like the George Washington Monument. This is the story that I heard about it. And it was going to have a rotating beacon on the top of it. It's on top of a tall hill in Providence, and 200 feet more. I mean, it's about 200 feet above sea level, and another 200 feet puts it at 400 feet above sea level with a rotating beacon on the top, supposedly so Boston can see it, because Roger was kicked out of Boston. This was not going to work. In the 1930s, Rhode Island is in the middle of the Depression. Money is tight, but that original group had put money in the bank in 1860 to build a monument to Roger. It had been earning interest since 1860. So they put that together with a little bit of money from the city. They took Prospect Park and built the statue of Roger there. They took his remains from the North Burial Ground and put them underneath the statue. And they took records from the Roger Williams Family Association and put them underneath the statue as well. And that's this statue up on the hillside. Now, some people look at the statue and go, that's a little bit of an odd pose for Roger. There's this strange arch in his back. It looks like he's off balance or something. Well, if you notice, he's standing on the prow of a canoe with a little wave down here. Little wave action down here. He's standing on the prow of the canoe. But what happened is they started carving the statue and they noticed there was a fault in the stone. And if they kept going straight, it just would not work. It would break apart. So they had this strange curve to it. So Roger's sitting back and surfing over the city of Providence as he extends his hand in blessing. This was dedicated in 1939. And supposedly, the purpose of this statue and this monument is so that we can think back on those things which are important to us about our freedoms. Think about this for a moment. Jerome Hahn wants to honor his father, a person of Jewish heritage, with the Spring Park. This statue in 1939 is put up on the hill to overlook everything and reminding us about our freedoms. And Roger created this first place with complete religious freedom. Again, remember, what's going on in the world influences the reasons why people do things. They had the rededication of this statue back in 2019, and I gave a short talk there that this statue, it tells us to hearken back to our better angels. the things that make us good people. That freedom of religion that this place was founded on. Because there's an awful, horrible thing that was going on just across the ocean that in a very short time we got involved with, called World War II, and the things that were going on in Nazi Germany. These are our first lines of defense, using our memories for why are we doing the things that we're doing. The Burning Grove was put in 1954, as I said, with the maple trees there. Now, to take a look, this is from 1939. It's a photograph of Providence from 1939. You're looking east, towards the east side. The railroad tracks are right at the very bottom of the picture. The old State House, move this out of the way so I can see things. The old State House is right here. This is North Main Street. If you notice, they're just building the statue to Roger Williams right here. And if you really like Providence, this is the brand new Hope High School, put in where the old Providence Reservoir was. The boundaries around that athletic field were the boundaries for the holding pond for the reservoir. But that's a brand new high school put right in there. This building right over here, that one little tiny building right on the corner, is the visitor center for the Roger Williams National Memorial today. Here is the Roger Williams Spring Park. You can see it's the footprint of a single building. And here's Alamo Lane coming right down here. I'm going to go to the next picture because it's just a little bit easier to see some of the things. This is the Roger Williams National Memorial. The visitor center is right over here on the far left. This is Park Row. The old State House is here. It was then Lonsdale Street. Here is the first police station in Providence. This is a building where the very first Providence Association for Physicians held their meeting in the 1830s. The Spring Park is here. All of this is the area that is now the Roger Williams National Memorial. This is one of my favorite pictures of Providence. This is May 31st, 1941. You can see the First Baptist Church right here. You can see St. Patrick's Church over here, the railroad tracks coming down into Providence.
Yeah.
And over here is the area covered by the Roger Williams National Memorial. Prospect Terrace is right over here. You can see the statues there. But you get over to here. That's the building where the visitor center is. You can see the brand new sidewalk where they put the monument and then the Roger Williams Spring Park right there. There's the original police station. All of that is where the memorial is today. This is only a few months before we got into World War II. There's a whole series of aerial photographs in tremendous detail for the time of the city, the old State House there, the Armory. And the only thing that I can think of is they were cognizant of what had happened in August and September of 1940 in London. And they wanted to have some sort of a record of what was here in the East Coast cities, because tremendous detailed photographs in May of 1941. There's another photograph you can get in orientation. The State House is right over on the far left, and the memorial is right in here. This is about 1960. This is where the Memorial's Visitor Center is. You might also know it as Gray's Watch Shop, one of the best places to get watches or clocks back in the earlier parts of the 20th, of the, not the
I do
earlier
remember
parts,
that, yeah.
through the 20th century. My grandparents both got wedding presents there from Gray's Watch Shop. I have both of the clocks too, which is really strange. There's the Spring Park. Here's St. John's Cathedral across the street. You can see this is after World War II because the rail yards are empty and it's all parking lots now. What has happened since the end of World War II is people are leaving Providence. They're going to the suburbs. That's when Warwick and Cranston really got developed. But it's leaving an awful lot of empty buildings in Providence. The population dropped from close to 270,000 in 1930
Wow.
down to about 150,000 about the time this picture was taken.
I never realized there were that many in
They
Providence.
left. Yeah. More than 100,000 people left
It
the
was
city.
going down, population going down.
They moved to everywhere else in the country. They also moved to the suburbs. That's when my folks left Providence and moved out to originally Cranston and then into Warwick. But now you've got a problem. There's an awful lot of buildings in the city, both housing, industrial, and shopping, that aren't being used. And they're old. And this is the 1950s and 1960s. People aren't looking into the past as much as they do today. They're looking to the future. Everything's going to be atomic. It's going to be the Jetsons. Everything's going to be new. So these old buildings are just that, old. They're falling apart. You can spend an awful lot of money and fix them up, or you can tear them down and put in new buildings. And that's where this concept of urban renewal came in, not only to get rid of old and decrepit buildings, but to clear out entire neighborhoods. It's starting. A lot of those buildings that used to fill up this lot are being torn down in the late 50s, 1960s. But at the same time, in the late 1950s, Senator Theodore Francis Green introduced legislation in Congress to create a Roger Williams National Monument right at the Spring Park. Says you got the spring, you got everything else. And they did all kinds of investigations, the Park Service, the Department of the Interior, looking at the place and saying, it doesn't have a label stamped on it that it's Roger Williams's. It comes from a later time period. We're not quite sure we can do that. And that legislation starting in the 56 or 57 languished in Congress. More and more buildings are being torn down for urban renewal. And in 1960, there was a presidential and a senatorial election. And the very first Roman Catholic became president of the United States. He had, at one point in his campaign, had to defend the fact that he was the Democratic president for the United States that happens to be a Roman Catholic, not the Roman Catholic candidate for president. He had to defend the fact that he had a faith that nobody else before had going after that office had had. There were places in this country where being a Roman Catholic was not a good thing. In that senatorial election, a freshman senator by the name of Pell, Senator Claiborne Pell, picked up that mantle that his friend, the senator from Massachusetts, had to fight about his religious affiliation and said, gee, my state is about real religious freedom and a separation of church and state. And he picked up that mantle that his predecessor, Theodore Francis Green, had started, changed a few things in it so it was more acceptable to the Department of the Interior, and came up with the idea of the Roger Williams National Memorial. The legislation was finally passed in 1965. The land was cleared. The Providence Redevelopment Agency got all the houses, tore everything out, and cleared the land of all of those buildings that you saw in those previous photos. This was a big vacant lot. And Congress did not appropriate any funds to do anything else with it. We're in the middle of the Vietnam War. Money is being spent on the arms industry and everything else like that. We don't have money to spend on parks, so it stayed like that. Legislation was passed in 1965. In 1978, we had a big blizzard. We just had the anniversary of that. And they had to tow the cars off of the highway to clear the highway of snow, and they had to move them somewhere. So most of this park was used as a parking lot, parking bumper to bumper of cars that they towed off of 95. And people could come there. They had a list of all the registration plates. And you could come there, find out where your car was, and get a date that you could pick it up when the cars around it had moved. It was a parking lot. A few years after that, Providence Intercity Arts Council had the Florentine Fair here for a couple of years. Again, a big vacant lot. They wanted to do something with it. But now we're getting into the 1980s. Congress finally appropriates funds for this big vacant lot. Have some grass, maybe a walkway. But they still weren't sure what to do with this blank sheet of paper. There were all sorts of ideas to tear everything down and to put a new interpretive visitor center in there and to have put fountains in it. All different kinds of ideas came up. But finally, they settled on a design by Albert Very and Associates. And Albert Very designed all different elements around the city: Water Place Park, the River Walk, down at Fox Point, the park that's down there. And he also designed this memorial. And I had the absolute joy of walking around the park with Mr. Albert Very probably about 10 or 15 years ago. And we got to talk, and he was looking around and he said, "This is what I saw in my mind's eye when I designed it. It's a contemplative space, an urban oasis where you can come and think about the ideals of Roger Williams. The little visitor center and the waysides give you some of the elements to think about. But the space itself is designed to be a quiet space amid the noise and the hustle and bustle of the city. If you ever actually go into the park, this area that's, I've got another picture here, hold on. You see, from all those other things, the city is quite grown up around it. Here is the memorial over here. Full-grown trees, landscaped. But if you actually go into it, here is North Main Street at the top, Canal Street at the bottom, Park Row on the right, and Smith Street on the left. Our visitor center is in the top left corner. This large area here, this circular area, we call the Big Bowl. If you walk along the sidewalks, now I've given tours at this place hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. And as you walk out of the place along the brick walkways, the red brick walkways, you have to use a good sized voice to get yourself heard because there's cars going by on both sides of you. As you come into the park, the trees sort of shelter you a little bit. But every time I take a group on a tour in this park, I walk them down into the middle of the bowl here. And then I start to whisper. Because the way the place is designed, it's so quiet. It's not like you're in the city at all anymore. This here, this is what's left of the Burn Grove. Norway maples from the 1950s are reaching the end of their life, and we're trying to decide what to do with that small parcel there. What kinds of trees we're going to go in there next. This is where the police station was. This is where that building that housed the first Providence Society of Physicians had their first meeting. The Spring Park. This is a place I've worked at for 26 years now. It's an amazing spot. And it's where a whole bunch of really important things started. not just for the state, not just for the country, but what Roger Williams did is recognized all over the world. In Geneva, Switzerland, there's a series of statues called the Heroes of the Reformation. And the one representing North America is Roger Williams. That's how we got to this place. This is the Roger Williams National Memorial. And that's about where I think I'm going to end this. I will gladly entertain any questions coming up. And let's see. How do I get out of screen share? There we go. Here we are. I'm back.
Does the spring still spring?
Good question. The source of the water for the spring is basically a big basin on top of the hill called Cat Swamp, which isn't there anymore as a swamp, but the basin, the rock formations that cause it are still there. And the water filters down through the hillside. We have had to fill with sand the bottom of the spring as part of mosquito abatement and things like that, and because people are stupid. But if you dig down about a foot or so into that sand, it's always damp and you will hit water.
John, when was the park dedicated?
As far as opening, we had a slow opening in the 1970s, back when it was just a big grassy opening. Actual dedication.
Or opening, I guess,
Yeah, I
1970.
mean, it's had several slow openings, if you would. The first ranger was there in the 1970s. He didn't actually spend much time in the park. He was over at, there was an office on Meeting Street with the Providence Preservation Society, but he would go there and give tours in the big open green space with the little walkways. The landscaping was done by 1984 and 85. And there was a small exhibit in the visitor center in the old Antrim Gray watch shop. I'm not sure that it actually had a hard opening. It's one of those things that just sort of slid through everything. And the one hard opening that I know of is when we changed the exhibit that had been in there for 25 years. And that was on February 6th of 2017.
Oh.
Brand new exhibit in there. It's based on on what Roger was charged with. He was his crime against was in Massachusetts was having new and dangerous opinions against the authority of the magistrates. And so that's the title of the exhibit, is New and Dangerous.
Mhm.
John, I grew up in Texas, and in 7th grade in public school, we had history courses that taught us Texas history, that gave us such a reverence for the history of the state that it's what gives Texans their identity. And it's gotten a little stupid in the last 30 years, but still, there's this wonderful, wonderful sense of being proud to be a Texan.
Yep.
And as I'm listening to you do this beautiful presentation, my kids grew up in the schools in East Greenwich. And to my knowledge, they never had any kind of appreciation of something like you just did, with so much passion and so much beauty of the history of Roger Williams in the state of Rhode Island. Can you take advantage of all the new media to find a way to get this presentation and this story to our 12 and 13-year-olds?
That's what I'm trying to do. When the COVID restrictions hit, first off, bang, we're closed. We can't go into work. They're not allowing us. I'm working from my home computer and going, I've got to be able to do something to tell the story.
Yeah.
So a buddy of mine is a videographer. We put together 21 videos called the Roger Williams Minute. And on the Roger Williams National Memorial YouTube channel, it's Roger Williams NPS. Okay. There are 21 videos about Roger Williams there, answering questions that are proposed. I'm in the process right now. We're looking at filming next week another 21 videos. So there's that. And they're short. They're the kind that's not going to bore people with, I'll tell you honestly, a 10-year-old kid is not going to sit and listen to this entire lecture.
Yeah, they will. Yeah, they
I
will.
think they would. I think they would. Yeah.
I'll tell you what we do have though, are programs, virtual programs where we can go into the schools. We did it with the North Providence Library, and I'm working with the Barrington Public Library right now. They're putting it into the Soames Elementary School 3rd grade. It's called Ask Roger. If you notice the background where I am, I'm inside Roger's house. I've got the clothing. Okay. And what I do is we prep them beforehand with materials so that the students all have questions for Roger Williams. And I appear like this via Zoom, and they ask me questions and I go off and tell them the various things that they want to know about Roger Williams. It's not something that we're trying to tell them. What do they want to know? They've heard these little things about it. So I've got 3 3rd graders at the beginning of next month, 3 3rd grades beginning of next month in Barrington. Our biggest problem as a national memorial is we can't advertise. But you guys can go out and tell people about the things that we have and we can do. We have virtual school programs. We're getting back to in-person school programs. We have virtual content. We will do programs like this with any group and literally anywhere that wants to listen to us. We have a stack of videos.
In Texas, when you go to the LBJ library, they give you a glass of Kool-Aid. Here, you can give them a glass of water from the spring.
I'm sure it'll have to be filtered out a couple of times, but yeah. But yeah, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of things that spring, the rock that's on the other side of the hill, or where the rock was, that would have been our Plymouth Rock. You know, we have these things right here, and it's not just, this guy 350 years ago came here and started an English settlement. That's not it. Roger did something very different. He came here, yes, but the first thing he did was make an agreement with the people that were here already that he could live here. He didn't just come in, plant a flag, and say, now this is England. He made a deal with the Narragansetts and the other sachems round about him, as he says, that it was okay for him to live here. Something nobody else did. You take a look, Boston had a wall around it. Plymouth had a wall around it. New Amsterdam, now New York, had a wall around it. That's where Wall Street is. Providence never had a wall around it. The highway, Route 1, was a thoroughfare town. It was just as likely to see Native Americans as English walking up and down that street. We did something different here, not just coming here, but also the very reason that he came here was for complete religious freedom. Nobody gets punished for what they believe. This was unheard of anywhere else. And yeah, I mean, I can go on for days.
Please do. Please do. We'll stay here. You got an audience.
Well, any more questions?
Are they planning to replace the Norway maples with, have they decided yet what kind of tree?
No, we have not. There's an awful lot of, because the Norway maples are part of the fabric of the National Memorial, there's an awful lot of steps going with the federal government on even putting a plan together to replace the trees. I personally would like to see something that's going to be there for a while. I'm of two minds. One would be certain kinds of oak trees. But I don't think there's enough room for oaks to get a good footing there. Remember, that was all built up at one time. There's only about 1.5 feet of dirt. And then the foundations, the concrete slabs and the dirt and the stone foundations for a lot of the buildings there. So while oak trees would be really nice, I think maybe apple trees, because that was one of the first things that the English brought over here, because it's a food that will store all winter.
Do native butterfly bushes.
Well, we already have a Native American garden there where we have the corn, beans, and squash that we grow there every year, and sunflowers. We already have that going on. But when you think about it, the two foods that store tremendously well for the early English colonists are the salmon and the apples. So even if your crops failed, when you get to the springtime, you get smoked salmon and applesauce. You know, there's worse starvation food out there.
You have to think about the lifespan of the trees, though.
Absolutely.
You want something that's going to last for, it'd be great if it would last for 100 years, but even 50 years would be great. I don't know how long an apple tree lasts, maybe 30.
Well, it depends on the breed of apple too. That's why there's an awful lot of research that goes into, you have to put a whole plan together. And with the federal government putting a plan together, that's a 5-year plan to put the plan together. And when we do it, it's going to be done right. I mean, the idea is for things to last. We don't want anything to be temporary there. It's a really important place. There's a lot of things that the government does that you wonder about the motivations of the people that are doing things. With the National Park Service, we really love what we have and what we do. And it is a tremendous honor to tell the stories of these places and to protect these places and get other people excited about these places so they want to help protect them. It's not us just going through the motions. I could never be a politician because they have to say things that they don't necessarily believe. It's nice to be a park ranger where you can really say what you believe about these places.
Can you pair raising money and building your memorial with the retirement of Jim Langevin, a quadriplegic from Rhode Island who did all the things he's done to open Congress? And is there some linkage that you could put together and make that a combination memorial and use it as a fundraising development source?
Unfortunately, probably not. I mean, Jim has been a great friend to us, helping to put through legislation and budgets and things like that. He's been an amazing friend to the Interior Department, but also to the Roger Williams National Memorial. He comes visits us every once in a while. He's just been amazing for us. But our legislation gives us a very narrow corridor to work in.
Okay.
And it says that we get our funding and don't have fundraisers, but we get our funding directly from the Department of the Interior and the federal budget. If there was an organization that was like Friends of the Roger Williams National Memorial, then maybe that's something they could do. But we really have our hands tied with federal regulations so that just so that things don't look funny.
Oh, we wouldn't want that in Rhode Island.
You know what? This is something I say at almost every talk when I'm talking about Roger Williams. I didn't get a chance here. Rhode Island was founded by an outlaw.
That's
And
right.
we've
That's
maintained
right.
the same respect for the law ever since. They're just guidelines.
John, do you get many tourist visitors to the state coming through, or is it more Rhode Islanders coming through? Or
Well, funny you ask. I'm the person that keeps track of the statistics, the visitor statistics. There is a majority of people that are either regional or local, okay, New England or whatever. But then you have people literally from all over the world that come there. All across the country, people are fascinated by all the national parks. Tourists that are just coming into Providence, we're one of the few visitor centers that people can, a visitor center, somewhere I can learn about the city. People know about Benefit Street, they know about the State House, and we're smack dab in between the two. So we're a place to stop. And we get a whole bunch of people that are just coming in to use the bathroom. But we've got a 5-minute video about Roger Williams. And if they're tourists, 5 minutes is short enough that it's like the stuff you buy at the grocery checkout. It's right there. It's not expensive. You can do 5 minutes. If it was 7 minutes, people would say that's too long. And then they get their dose of education one way or the other. We like I said, we like tricking people into being educated, putting the dogs on the waysides. People will look at dogs and, what's the dog doing? They're little tricks like that. We put little secrets in the video to make people ask questions. We talk about Roger leaving his wife behind to go back over to England. We never talk about him getting back with his wife. And people that are listening will say, did he ever get back with his wife? Bang, we're talking to them. They're asking questions. That's the secret to doing this. It's not just reading the right names and dates. It's making the story interesting so people feel that there's something it's part of real life.
Tom, we should have John review our signage plans.
Yeah,
Main
That's right. That's
Street.
right. Yes.
We
yes.
have to have little tricks to get people to read them.
That's right. That's right.
Absolutely.
Boy. Well, thank you. That was a wonderful lecture, John. We all appreciate it. A
My
very,
pleasure.
very nice, very,
Yes,
very nice
thank you.
presentation. Thank
And
you.
when you want me to come back and talk about Roger Williams, just let me know.
I would
we-